Take a look at page 413. This is what is colloquially called the Ten Commandments. Now let me just introduce you to a painful fact. Nowhere in the entire Jewish tradition is this ever called the Ten Commandments. Ever. And there's a very simple reason, because it doesn't contain 10 commandments. It's either 14 or 15, depending on how you count. Ten Commandments is a Christian designation. Okay, the Blue Book writes the Ten Commandments, but what can they do? They're writing to people who don't have any Jewish background. In the book itself, it's called Aseres HaDvarim, which means 10 statements. In rabbinic literature, it's called Aseres HaDibros, which means 10 pronouncements, but nowhere is it called the Ten Commandments. And I try my best to avoid that phrase, though sometimes I slip. I was making that statement at the very outset. Now, there are a few details I want to pick up at the beginning, and then the last half I want to talk about something very fundamental and deep. On 413, you have the last of them, which is verse 14. You shall not covet your friend's house, shall not covet your fellow's wife, manservant, maidservant, ox, donkey, or anything belongs to your fellow. I don't know what covet means in English, and I really don't care because I'm interested in the Hebrew text. Sachmod means to find something very attractive, and you have a strong desire for it, and you're motivated to try to get it. That's roughly what you have for Sachmod. Now, my attitude towards this text is try to take it as simplistically and literally as possible. Then when you get in trouble, so then you can meditate on how to try to resolve it in the most intelligent way. So let me ask you a question. I'm walking down a street in Beverly Hills. It just so happens that I have a spare $100 million to spend. This is, of course, a fantasy. And I notice a gigantic, palace over there with gigantic grounds and everything else. And I think, man, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I'll bet I could get it for a mere $30 million. I go up and knock on the door and I say, listen, I admire your house. I'm offering you $30 million. Sell it to me. Have I violated a biblical commandment? Because I want his house. I'm attracted to his house. I really have a strong desire for his house. Am I violating a biblical commandment? Let's suppose somebody wants to sell his house. So he puts up a sign, for sale. Is he putting a stumbling block in front of the blind? He's causing people to desire his house and thereby violate a biblical commandment? Doesn't this sound a little out of touch with reality? How is economics going to take place? What do you do when you advertise? You advertise in order to get people to want what you have to sell so they'll buy it. I remember when advertising just gave you information about the item for sale so you could decide on your own. That went out 75 years ago. The purpose of advertising is to make you want it. Are they causing you to violate biblical commandments? Hard to think that that's correct. And therefore, some of the commentators explain as follows. It's obviously forbidden to steal something from somebody else. Having a passionate desire for the other guy's stuff can lead you to steal it. If on the basis of the passionate desire you steal it or make an attempt to steal it, then you violate this commandment. But merely having the passion for it, having the desire for it, that's not going to be a violation of the command. There are 10 pronouncements, and the tradition divides them into 5 and 5. The first 5 deal with the relationship between man and God, and the second 5 deal with the relationship between man and man. And each of those designations has a problem with the last on the list. The last on the list of the first 5 is honoring your father and mother. That does sound like it's interpersonal. Pretty much on the surface, that's talking about people to people. Yet it's in the first 5, which is supposed to be between man and God. And on the other hand, some worry about coveting, which if you thought it meant just desiring in your heart, doesn't hurt the other person at all. So why would that be regarded as interpersonal? So I've already answered that, because you're only going to violate it if you start to take measures to steal it, and then it becomes interpersonal. Okay. What about honoring your parents? How is that supposed to be between man and God? So the question is raised in the poskim, in the legal decisors. What intuitively is the foundation of honoring your parents? Intuitively, I'm putting the word intuitively as a qualifier, and I won't go do that. I'm just putting it as a qualifier, especially for the video. Is the enormous amount of debt of gratitude that you owe to your parents because of all that they do for you, invest in you. What would happen in a case where the child owes no debt of gratitude to the parents at all? Such a thing not only can happen, but does happen. For example, the pregnancy is a mistake, and it's discovered too late to have an abortion. Immediately after the birth, the child is abandoned in a train station. The parents had no kindly intentions towards this baby whatsoever. Had they discovered the pregnancy earlier, they would have aborted. It's just when they discovered it, was not practical to do that. Or there are cases of terrible mistreatment where children suffer because of what parents do to them, and it could be argued that they don't have a debt of gratitude. Is the child bound by the biblical commandment to show honor to his parents under those kinds of conditions? It's a matter of discussion, but many authorities hold that he is. Now, if he is, the question will be why? If it isn't gratitude that's driving it, what then is driving it? And of course, as you probably understand, we're talking about a biblical commandment. If I don't have an answer, so what? We're talking about what God commanded. Must I always understand what God does? No, not required. But what they say here is this, that God used them to bring you into the world. They are for you the tools of God's activity, and it's because they're associated with God in that way that you should show them honor. You should show them honor as the ones whom God used to bring you into existence. And that means that you're showing honor to them is really a relationship between you and God, not between you and them. They are the focus of your activity, but what motivates it is how you relate to God. And that's a way of explaining why the fifth in this case is a regulation between God and man and God. By the way, this is the vocabulary of the tradition, but lest be misunderstood. Obviously, every commandment is a relationship with God. So, the prohibition against stealing and the requirement to give charity, what's being regulated is your relationship, your interaction with other people. Of course, that's a commandment from God. It isn't as if one type is between man and God, and the other type between man and God is out of the picture. On the contrary, there wouldn't be any commandment at all if there weren't a commander. But the question is, where is your activity focused? Are you focused on other people, or is it focused only on your relationship with God? Okay, now here you have the commandment, honor your father and your mother. That plays off another commandment. Verse 3, every man, your mother and father shall you revere. Stop there. You don't have to read the rest of the verse. What differences do you see between what's written on 657 and what's written on 411? The Torah here is trying to make sure that the treatment of the parents will be equal. And it does so by putting first the one who's likely to be slighted in the commandment. If you're talking about reverence, which in Hebrew is a word that connotes fear and awe, especially in a religious household, it's easier, it's more natural to have fear and awe for the father than for the mother. First of all, the children, as they grow up, have much more familiarity with the mother. She's tending them all the time. And familiarity doesn't have to breed contempt, but it definitely breeds familiarity. And it means that you don't stand in awe, you feel too close. The father, who is supposed to be the repository of religious instruction and religious decision, also generates a sense of awe. Therefore, in the commandment to awe, the Torah puts the mother first. Precisely because it's more natural for you to have more awe for the father, the Torah doesn't want you to do that. The Torah wants you to have equal awe for both, so it puts the mother first. On 411, what's translated as honor, kabed, which could require some interesting analysis, but the actual application of the mitzvah is service, physical service. Make the parent breakfast, take him to an appointment, mend his clothes, if he needs a house to be clean the house. Physical service. Who are you more likely to be motivated to give physical service to? Your mother, because she's taking care of you all the time. She's making you meals and washing your clothes and bandaging your injuries and so forth and so on. So of course, if one of them needs your physical help, you're much more likely motivated to expend it for the mother than the father. So the Torah puts the father first to tell you, no, they have to be treated equally. And that is the rule, that they have to be treated equally, with one exception, which I'll mention in a moment, but as you'll see, the exception is a very limited exception. Now, in the 657, it says, every man shall have or offer his mother and father. Why is the emphasis put on the man? And these two commandments play off one another. They play off one another in a way that they are bound to one another. There's two sides of one set of responsibilities. One of the applications of 657 is that you should not contradict your parents. Reverence, awe, respect, fear means you're not allowed to contradict your parents. The halakha goes even further than that. You're not even allowed to agree with your parents. Can you imagine why?
But it's suggesting that they need your approval to be substantial.
No, okay, so that's right. And it also implies that, if I disagreed, I would say that also, right? And that I'm standing independently and expressing my opinion. Just so happens this time I agree, but if I didn't agree, I'd be on record. Now, careful. You don't have to agree. You just must not express agreement or disagreement. Just do something very un-Jewish. Keep your mouth shut. You don't have to agree. And when you're not in their presence, you don't have to act the way they would act. You don't have to act according to their principles. But you mustn't voice disagreement or agreement, because in so doing, what you're implying is that we're on a par, that we are peers. And that's wrong to imply. That's a violation of reverence and awe. You don't sit in your parent's seat. When the parent comes into the room, you stand up. That is to show, and the idea of physical service has the same implication. What does it mean when I make breakfast for my parent? I have a life. I'm not totally at leisure. I have a life. And what I'm saying is, fixing breakfast for my parent is more important than what I would be doing for myself. That's also showing that they stand above me, and I recognize that. I'm willing to act that out. Now, having said all of that, when a woman gets married, she's put in an equivocal position because she has responsibilities to serve her husband. She also has responsibility to make his breakfast and to wash his clothes, take care of the house generally. So now, if it comes to a conflict, there are cases in which the husband's the responsibility of the wife for the husband's needs takes precedence over the responsibility she has for her parents' needs. Under those conditions, the mother's authority on the child is less than the father's authority on the child. But that's only because she has responsibilities to the husband. If there's a divorce, the responsibility of the child to each is equal, absolutely equal. There's no preference of one given over to the other. I want to go back now to the beginning, page 409. The first of the 10 pronouncements, on 407. The first of the 10 pronouncements is, I am Hashem, your God, who has taken you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. Here's another reason why it's peculiar to speak of the Ten Commandments because, on the surface anyway, this isn't a commandment. It's just a statement of fact. Then the commandments come. Prohibitions against idol worship and all the rest. And since this is one of the 10, it's not a commandment at all. One question that is raised about this issue, about this sentence is, if God is introducing, this is the revelation that all Jews heard at the time, and he's introducing certain master legislation, which is contained in the 10 pronouncements, why would he choose this self-identification? Is there an alternative self-identification which suggests itself to you as at least equally relevant? How about the creator of the universe? That's not a small thing. And one would assume that being the creator of the universe does give you some kind of authority about how to run the world. Why doesn't God say, I am Hashem, your God, who created the universe? This question, we have a record that Rabbi Yehuda Levi asked this question. He didn't write it, but the Ibn Ezra reports that Rabbi Yehuda Levi asked this question. And he answered it in an extremely fundamental way, using a principle which colors how you understand the Torah as a whole. He says, imagine that he started that way. I am Hashem, your God, who created the heavens and the earth, the universe, out of nothing. Who could relate to that? How many people possess the concepts to understand that? And if they possess the concepts to understand it, who cares about it? It's not practical. It's such a distant, abstract, philosophical idea that many people aren't going to relate to it. And because many people aren't going to relate to it, that's why the Torah didn't start with that. But started with something everyone could relate to, because everyone being spoken to was a slave in Egypt. Every one of them. Now, when you think about it, that's not an obvious principle at all. What, the Torah is written in such a way that people can relate to it? It's written for a community in a way that the community can understand? But yes, that's a general principle about the way the Torah is written. And when you read various passages which seem to you to be questionable in various ways, you have to keep that in mind. For example, as the Kuzri writes, which is written by Yehuda Levi, and the Maimonides writes in several places, what about the anthropomorphisms, where God is portrayed in not only human features, but physical features? What are they doing there? If the official doctrine of Judaism is that God has no physical features whatsoever, and certainly is not human, why do you have all those descriptions? And Maimonides answers in several places, because if you didn't have descriptions like that, many people couldn't relate to it. They just couldn't relate to it. So the Torah adopts a two-tiered strategy. The basic text describes God in those terms. That's something that everyone can relate to. Those who will advance to greater level of education will be told these are only metaphors, and they only indicate God's actions, as I've spoken to some of you about, and they're not to be taken literally, and that person will get a complete picture. And people are not capable of getting a complete picture, at least they will get descriptions that they can relate to. It would be much worse if the Torah just started with the abstract, and 50% of the people say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't hear it. I don't know what you mean. And just drift off. That would be much worse. So the Torah is prepared to write in terms that are literally problematic in order to make sure to include everybody. This is a principle that applies in the Torah over and over and over again. Okay, now, I said, the words do not express a commandment. It's true, they don't. They just express a statement of fact. But there are those who raise the question as to whether or not a commandment could be associated with these words. This is the beginning of God's revelation to the Jewish people about the laws that he's giving them. Is there a kind of first principle, logically, upon which all legislation rests? Pretty obviously, the first principle is God's existence. Our legislation is commandments. There can't be any commandments without a commander, as I said about 12 minutes ago. So, obviously, the existence of the commander is absolutely essential for the whole system. Maybe the whole system starts with and leans on a commandment to believe in God's existence. And then you have an explanation for what commandments are. And maybe that's what should be associated here, not literally in the words, but to associate with this introduction, the introductory piece of legislation upon which everything depends, a commandment to believe in God's existence. Okay? This is the question that is raised both in some of the medievals and in later commentators. There is an argument that that can't be right. That cannot be right. There's an argument based on strict logic. And I'm a logician. When I first came across it in our sources, it was stated as a one-liner. And read like this: every command presupposes a commander, so belief in the commander can't be the content of the command. End of story. So I thought, boy, that sounds clever. I wonder what it means. I have pretty strict standards for myself, working things out in detail and making sure every step is easily understood, that is intuitive. And I was not satisfied with that one-liner, for me anyway. And I worked on it for a while. And this is what I came up with. Let's think about commands. How do commands work? How do they interact with people? Let's take, for example, a case where in the Israeli army, the commander says to a soldier, shut the door, skor the delet. And the soldier doesn't hear him. And he doesn't shut the door. Has he disobeyed the command? I think one might say no. He didn't hear the command. He didn't disobey it. If that sounds perhaps wishy-washy, let's make it more precise. Has he deliberately disobeyed the command? Surely not, because he didn't hear it. Or let's say that the commander is from Ethiopia and the soldier is from Russia, and they have very different ways of speaking Hebrew. And the commander says, shut the door. And what the soldier hears is, open the window. So he goes over and he opens the window. Is he deliberately disobeying the command? Surely not. He's not in receipt of the command. He heard sounds, but since he didn't understand them, in order to deliberately disobey a command, you have to understand the command. Now, a third scenario. Reuben and Shimon join the army at the same time. They're assigned to the same base. They go through the same training. And then Reuben goes home for a week. Shimon stays on the base. When Reuben returns, Shimon sees him. Shimon says, I order you to shut the door. And Reuben says, shut up, I'm tired. Let me put my stuff away. And Shimon says, I order you to shut the door. And Reuben, makes fun of him. Because poor Reuben doesn't know that while he was home, Shimon was promoted. And he now is an officer. And he can give orders. And Reuven is bound to obey them. But he doesn't know that. Is Reuven deliberately disobeying the order? No, because he doesn't know it's a valid order. He thinks it's a joke. He's not in the position to know that it's a valid order. In order to deliberately disobey an order, you have to hear it, understand it, and know that it's valid. Imagine I get in the mail a letter from the United States Treasury, and it says, we are alerted that you have an illegal wine press, and we want you to destroy it within 20 days, and if not, we're going to come and impound your house, and so on and so on. I think, what are they talking about? Legal wine press? What are they talking about? Then I notice the date on the letter is April 1st. Oh, April 1st. Right, April Fool's Day. Okay, it's a joke. And 20 days later, they come banging at my door, boarding up the doors, You didn't destroy the press. We're seizing your house. But I don't have one, and it's got to be a mistake, and it was dated April 1st. Did I deliberately disobey the order of the Treasury Department? I don't think so. Because I was not aware that it was a genuine order. I was not aware that the appropriate authority is behind the order. Okay, now let's take these trivialities and apply them to the suggestion that there's a commandment to believe in God. And let's ask, if there is such a commandment to believe in God's existence, could that command be deliberately disobeyed? Is that a logical possibility, to deliberately disobey it? Well, to deliberately disobey a command, you got to hear it, understand it, and know that the appropriate authority backs it. In our case, we're talking about commandments. What's the appropriate authority? God. So in order to deliberately disobey any command, I have to know that God's authority is behind it. Okay? So now, here I am. Command comes in the mail. Return address, God. I say, okay, I wonder what he wants from me. Make Kiddush Friday nights on wine. So at the bottom of the list is, believe in my existence. Could I disobey that? How could I disobey it if I know it's a genuine command? To know it's a genuine command means to know that it comes from God. So I'm stuck. I can't disobey that. I can disobey the command to make Kiddush with wine. No, I'm not doing that. Not making Kiddush, not drinking wine. That's up to me. I can decide yes or no. But to violate the commandment to believe in God's existence deliberately, I have to know that God's behind the command. So I can't violate it. It's not possible to violate it. A command that you can't deliberately violate is very peculiar. But it's worse than that. Let's talk about deliberately fulfilling a command. What does it mean to deliberately fulfill a command? I hear the command. I think, like in the Israeli army, the command is to shut the door. What does the soldier say? I'll consider my options. The Golan Heights was taken against orders. The ceasefire was signed Friday afternoon, and the Golan Heights was taken on Shabbos. Because the soldier said, we're not leaving that with the Syrians. Forget it, we're not doing that. Forget. You want it to stop? Well, we're not listening. The whole attack on the Golan Heights was against orders. They just went. That's all. That's Israeli army. So now, to deliberately obey a command means you hear the command, you consider your options, and decide, yes, I will. Is it possible with a commandment to believe in God to do that? In order for me to recognize that it's a commandment, I have to recognize it's coming from God. I've already fulfilled it. It's already over. I can't now go through a deliberation and think, shall I or shall I not fulfill it? So that being the case, to imagine a commandment to believe in God's existence, you have to imagine a commandment that can't be deliberately disobeyed and can't be deliberately obeyed. That doesn't sound like a command. It has no guts. It can't guide your action. The purpose of a command is to change how a person acts because it takes into account that there is a command and there are consequences for obeying and disobeying, and then he uses that in his decision-making process what to do. This commandment couldn't do that. That is how I understand the one-liner that you can't have a commandment to believe in God's existence because every command presupposes the existence of the commander. To recognize that it's a command at all, you already believe in the commander. Nothing left to tell you to do about believing in his existence. It's already all over. And that means there can't be a commandment to believe in God's existence. Okay, but when you look into the literature, you do find commandments that look like this. Indeed, in Maimonides' book of the commandments, where he gives a list of all 613 commandments, I'm just saying for the recording, to say it's a list of all the commandments is misleading and not quite true. But okay, because counting commandments is a separate discipline. Okay, I said it, but put it on the side. I don't want to quote it later. He says in the book of commandments, which he wrote in Arabic, that there's a commandment to believe in God's existence. That's the way it's translated. In the Mishnah Torah, which he wrote later, and he wrote it in Hebrew, he says there's a commandment to know God's existence. That's not the same thing. Believing and knowing are not the same thing. Believing is something which is free. You're able to believe whatever you like. Knowing requires having good reason. And having good reason is a matter of investigation, reading, thinking, discussing, debating, analyzing. It requires an effort. When Maimonides says in the Mishnah Torah that there's a commandment to know God exists, that means do the research. And here a person could say yes or no. So no. I was brought up believing God exists. I'm not interested in doing research. I'd rather spend my time at the beach or other mitzvos, and therefore I'm not doing that. There you can say yes or no. There you have the ability to obey or disobey deliberately, as against belief. And if you'll ask what Maimonides says in the Book of the Commandments, so there are some translators who say that standard translation is not correct. There was a Rabbi Miller who lived in Europe before the Second World War, who learned Arabic and himself wrote a commentary on the Arabic version. Rabbi Kapach writes also that the word in Arabic means to know, which would mean that Maimonides didn't change his mind. And if you insist that the other translation is correct, then he changed his mind. And his view then is expressed by the later source, not the earlier source. So that means in Maimonides' case, the commandment that he certifies is a commandment to know. That commandment is not problematic the way the commandment to believe would be. There's another way to understand it, and that is this. People know things, but often don't take them into account. They don't live in terms of what they know. Ask any smoker, at least any smoker who doesn't corrupt his mind by pretending that it doesn't hurt him. I know, but that's what I'm doing. You may have heard, I'm sure none of you have experienced this, but you may have heard of students who wait till the night before the exam to study and get lower grades and kick themselves and so on and so on. And they know, but they just don't take it into account. Lahamin in Hebrew means directly to implement something in your life, to live in terms of it, to be faithful to it. Emunah and lahamin in the Tanakh, the first few times they occur for sure, mean specifically to trust in something and to live in terms of it. When the Amalekites attack the Jews before the Torah is given in the wilderness, and there's an army, and they fight, and Moses climbs a mountain, and his arms go up, and when his arms are up, the Jews are victorious. When his arms go down, the Amalekites are victorious. And Aaron and Hur seat him on a rock, and they hold his hands up, and the Jews are victorious. It says his hands were emunah until sunset. Doesn't mean they were belief or believing. It means they were faithful. They were up the whole time, and that enabled the Jews to succeed. What we read the other day, where God accuses Moses and Aaron after hitting the rock, instead of speaking to the rock, where he says, Yan lo ha'amantem bi, because you weren't mamin in me. It isn't as if they were flirting with atheism. It's you didn't trust me. You didn't live up to what I wanted you to do. You weren't faithful to what I wanted you to do. So lahamin can be taken as to implement it faithfully in your life. And then the mitzvah will be gold. It has nothing to do with belief. It has to do with living in terms of God's existence and what he wants from a Jew. So those can be foundations. Now, the final question that has to be raised is, all right, you've told us that in logic, a commandment to believe in God's existence is incoherent. But look, you did say that believing in God's existence is the foundation of the whole system. If God didn't exist, then all commandments would be idle, empty. So how do you get the foundation? If you don't have a commandment to believe in God's existence, how do you get a foundation for the system? And the answer is you get it through logic. There have to be logical reasons to believe in God's existence. Whether it's pure logic, or it's applied logic, or it's logic on the basis of experience, there have to be good logical reasons to believe in God's existence, which then becomes the foundation for the entire structure. If it weren't so, you would not be able to fault anyone who said, look, I don't believe God exists, and therefore there are no commandments. You agree to that yourself, and therefore I'm faultless if I don't keep any of the commandments. Indeed, Rabbi Yochanan Wasserman puts the point this way. This is a general point of logic, which is logic and philosophy, which is very important. The person says, I just don't believe it. Can he be held responsible for that? Is it possible to say to the person, what do you mean you don't believe it? You ought to believe it. You have to believe it. If that's unclear to you, that's something which you think might not be clear, let me give you a brutal example. Suppose somebody says he doesn't believe in the Holocaust. Is that okay? Some people do, some people don't. I just don't happen to believe in it. It's a free world, and that's how my mind is disposed not to believe in it. Is that okay? Better not be okay. Why is it not okay? Because there's overwhelming evidence that it's true. And believing it didn't happen, or even not believing that it did happen, is going to imply that Jews are vicious, because Jews are cashing in on the Holocaust. That's what the anti-Semites say. They got the sympathy of the world to create a state on the basis of the Holocaust. If it didn't happen, and we're cashing in on it, then we become vicious criminals. But you can hold a person responsible for what he believes or doesn't believe, because it's a responsibility to form your belief according to the evidence that's available. And if there's enormous, overwhelming evidence available, the person just chooses to ignore it, is doing something for which he's liable. And you can push this even more strongly when Rabbi Chanan does this. And you can accuse him, in most cases, of inconsistency. If a person lives life on the basis of a certain way of dealing with questions, how does he settle a question? Well, he looks it up in Encyclopedia Britannica. Or he has friends whom he trusts who've been there and he can ask them for their advice. Or he thinks about it and then submits his ideas to other people who might disagree and tests them. That's how he does it. Then he comes to question Q. And at question Q, he just says, this is where I am. This is what I say. Then you can accuse him of internal inconsistency. You can accuse him of internal inconsistency and hold him responsible. Dennis Prager, whom I don't use as an authority, but I quote him when he says something intelligent, says something very intelligent. If you're dealing with a person that denies the Holocaust, don't pile up more and more evidence against him, because he will just create fantasies by which he can dismiss the evidence. Ask him, in your view, for what does the average person have more evidence? The Holocaust or the United States Civil War? Is that a difficult question? Yeah. There's an enormous mountain of evidence for the Holocaust. The amount of evidence we have for the Civil War is very, very little. We have some books that were written about it and some statues. That's about it. So why are you convinced that the United States Civil War is a real event and the Holocaust is not? There you're asking him why he's not guilty of inconsistency in changing his standards. For the Civil War, you have very, very, very relaxed standards. And for the Holocaust, you have exaggeratedly difficult standards. Now, of course, if he says he doesn't believe in the Civil War either, then you win, because he's beyond discussion, especially if it's in public. No one's going to tolerate that. But that's the way you attack this person, by saying you're guilty of an inconsistency. Here's one which some people will be reluctant to use, but I think I can justify it. He asked the guy, do you believe that people actually walked on the moon? How much evidence do you have for that? You or your friends, how much evidence do you have? How many other people went to the moon? Couldn't it all be just a Hollywood setup? Still, everyone agrees that people walked on the moon. You have more evidence that people walked on the moon than that the Holocaust took place? Obviously not. Then how is it that you accept people walking on the moon and you deny the Holocaust? And if he says, no, I don't have evidence of the Holocaust because it's all Jewish evidence, and the Jews are liars. So first of all, it's not true. The whole Western world agrees that there was a Holocaust. And second of all, if you think the Jews are liars, what's your evidence for that? Present evidence for that. Just push the same argument back another step. So, says Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, I'm putting in examples, but the idea that he's applying is this. One can be asked, you don't believe in God? Did you use the same techniques, same standards for investigating the existence of God that you would for a disease, or that you would for a piece of history, or that you would something in economics? Did you use the same standards and the same criteria? Or did you have a different set of standards and a different set of criteria? And if you did, then you're guilty of inconsistency, and you can be held responsible for the failure. So I believe that the ultimate foundation, from this point of view that I'm describing, the ultimate foundation for Jewish belief is logic. Now, of course, I'm a logician, so I'm prejudiced. So maybe I'm wrong. But as I push this line of reasoning, the ultimate foundation of Jewish belief is logic.